Hello everyone, I'm the storyteller and I'm here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching now? Get comfortable and relax. The black train, the arrival. The sound came first, low and mournful, like the distant wail of a dying beast. It slid into the small town of Maple Ridge, just as the clock struck midnight. No whistle, no screech of brakes, just that haunting hum that sent chills racing up the spines of anyone still awake to hear it. The train was blacker than the night, its surface gleaming like oil, with no markings to suggest where it had come from or where it was going. Danny Forrester, the night shift clerk at the all-night gas station, was the first to see it. Through the smeared glass of the shop window, he watched as the train came to a silent stop on the old unused tracks that cut across the edge of town. The tracks were supposed to be abandoned. No train had run them in nearly 50 years. But here it was, as solid and real as the gas pumps outside. Danny squinted, confused. There was no conductor, no passengers stepping off, no sound of footsteps crunching on gravel. Just the train, sitting still and quiet, like a predator waiting to pounce. The invitation. Word spread quickly the next day. By noon, everyone in Maple Ridge had heard about the mysterious black train. Some claimed they'd seen doors sliding open in the dead of night, while others swore they'd heard faint whispers calling out to them. Most dismissed it as a prank, a ghost story to keep the kids entertained. But by the following night, the train had moved closer. This time, stopping near the heart of town, its sleek black surface reflecting the streetlights. That's when the flyers appeared, printed on thick black paper with shiny silver ink. They were plastered on telephone poles, shop windows, and even the church doors. Free rides, one night only. Midnight departure. No explanation. No contact information. Just those words. The riders. By midnight, a small group had gathered near the train. Curiosity, boredom, or a thirst for adventure had driven them there. Among them were Kevin Lutz, a washed-up mechanic with nothing left to lose. Mrs. Holloway, the town's reclusive widow, and Rebecca James, a college student home for the summer. The doors of the train hissed open, revealing a warm golden interior, plush seats, soft carpeting, and chandeliers that swayed gently overhead. It looked like something out of a dream or a trap. "Don't do it," whispered old Mr. Grady, who lived in a crumbling shack by the tracks. He stood nearby, shaking his head. "That train's not right. Ain't been right since the last time it came." But his words were lost in the hum of excitement. One by one, the passengers stepped aboard. The door slid shut. The train gave a soft, almost contented sigh before it began to move, gliding silently into the night. The return days passed. The train didn't come back, and neither did the passengers. Maple Ridge was left to stew in unease. Whispers of ghost trains and disappearing townsfolk swirling in every corner. Some blamed the government, others blamed the devil. And then, after a week, Kevin Lutz returned. He showed up on Main Street at dusk, his clothes torn and his eyes wide with terror. He mumbled incoherently, stumbling from one person to the next. The sheriff was called, but by the time he arrived, Kevin had collapsed in the middle of the street. At the hospital, Kevin's ramblings chilled the doctors to their bones. He spoke of tunnels that stretched into endless darkness, of shadowy figures that whispered secrets into his ears, of passengers who were swallowed by the train itself. "It's alive," he croaked. "The train's alive." The possession. Kevin didn't stay Kevin for long. Within days, he changed. His eyes turned pitch black, and his voice carried a strange echo, as if someone or something else was speaking through him. He began walking the streets at night, knocking on doors, asking questions about the train. "Have you seen it?" he'd ask, his lips curling into a smile that didn't belong to him. "It's coming back soon. You'll want to ride." The townsfolk avoided him, bolting their doors and drawing their curtains tight. But Kevin wasn't alone for long. Soon, others began to change. Mrs. Holloway, Rebecca James, and a handful of others who hadn't even boarded the train. It was as if Kevin had infected them, spreading whatever had come back with him like a disease. The last ride. 1 month later, the train returned. This time, the town was ready. Or so they thought. Sheriff Duggan and his deputies had barricaded the tracks with their cruisers, guns drawn. But when the train slid into view, the barricades simply melted away, as if the train's very presence rewrote reality. The doors opened and the infected, Kevin and the others, boarded without hesitation. Behind them, a few curious souls from the crowd stepped forward, as if drawn by an invisible force. Sheriff Duggan yelled for them to stop, but his words were swallowed by the same low hum that had haunted the town for weeks. The train left once more, and this time, it didn't come back. The shadows of Maple Ridge. Maple Ridge is quiet now. Too quiet. The streets are empty, and the houses stand dark and abandoned. Those who stayed behind claim they hear whispers at night, soft and enticing. Some say they've seen shadows moving at the edge of their vision, always out of reach. No one speaks of the black train anymore. But sometimes, late at night, a low, mournful sound drifts through the air, and the people lock their doors and pray it doesn't stop. Because when it does, they know it won't leave empty. Certainly, here's the continuation and conclusion of your script for the black train. The leftovers, the ones who remained in Maple Ridge, were no longer themselves. They were haunted, not in the ghostly sense, but in their eyes and actions. a heaviness that hung like chains around their necks. At the diner, Mrs. Hoffer Hawthorne, who had worked the grill for over 30 years, started burning every meal she cooked. She claimed she could feel eyes watching her from the alley across the street. Down at the general store, Earl Sanderson refused to stock the shelves near the front windows, muttering that the shadows were too alive. No one asked what he meant. They were all thinking it. The whispers at night grew louder, not just faint murmurs carried on the wind, but guttural, hungry sounds that wrapped around the minds of those brave enough or unlucky enough to still live there. Children cried themselves to sleep. Adults avoided mirrors because sometimes when they glanced into them, the reflection didn't move quite right. The last witness, Sarah Mulligan, a young journalist from the city, arrived in Maple Ridge a few months after the train's last visit. The town's eerie quiet had piqued her curiosity. The black train had become a myth by then, a cautionary tale whispered in nearby towns. "You don't want to end up like Maple Ridge," people would say. Sarah didn't believe in ghost stories, but she was chasing one anyway. Armed with a notebook, a camera, and a stubborn streak, she began knocking on doors. "Tell me about the train," she asked everyone she met. Most refused to talk. Others would only shake their heads and mutter things like, "It'll come for you too," before slamming the door. One night, Sarah was staying in the Maple Ridge Motel, the last business still open. She was reviewing her notes when she heard it. The low, mournful wail. The sound vibrated through the walls, shaking her glass of water until it spilled across the table. Grabbing her camera, Sarah rushed outside. There it was, the black train. It wasn't on the tracks this time. It was floating above the ground, hovering like a dark cloud just outside the motel parking lot. The air around it shimmered, bending reality like heat rising off asphalt. She should have run, but instead, she lifted her camera. As soon as the flash went off, the train turned. It wasn't possible, but she could feel it staring at her, watching her the way a predator watches prey. The reckoning. Sarah didn't remember boarding the train. One moment, she was standing in the parking lot. The next, she was inside. The golden glow of the chandeliers had turned dim and sickly, casting long shadows that writhed on the walls. The plush seats were now tattered and torn, and the floor was sticky with something she didn't want to identify. She wasn't alone. The passengers who had boarded weeks earlier were there, or what was left of them. Kevin Lutz sat in a corner, his skin pale and stretched tight over his bones. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Mrs. Holloway was standing in the aisle, her head tilted unnaturally to the side, her eyes unblinking. Rebecca James sat in a seat near the window, her fingers twitching rhythmically, as if playing an invisible piano. "Help me," someone whispered. Sarah turned, but there was no one there. The train began to move, its low hum growing louder. The windows showed nothing but darkness, thick and endless, as if the world outside had ceased to exist. Sarah stumbled toward the nearest door but it wouldn't budge. A shadow moved in the corner of her eye. She turned to see it. Tall, thin, and inhuman, its eyes glowing faintly in the gloom. It reached out, its long fingers curling toward her. And then, the train stopped. The escape. Sarah awoke in the middle of the woods, her camera clutched tightly in her hands. The train was gone, and the tracks were overgrown with weeds, as if they hadn't been used in decades. Shaking, she flipped through the photos on her camera. Most were blurry, but one was clear. It showed the shadowy figure standing behind her, its glowing eyes fixed on the lens. Sarah fled Maple Ridge that night, never looking back. She published her story a week later, but no one believed her. The photo was dismissed as a hoax. The train was deemed a fabrication. But Sarah knew the truth. The end.